Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Pastor Bob Miller, and let me add my welcome to you all, however you are joining us here this morning. And it is morning here in Southeast Michigan if you're watching this live. If you're catching us on demand, it is whatever time it is for you, but we are still all connected through the Spirit of God. Today, we continue our exploration that we're calling Hope for Hard Times. For sure, hard times are a part of life. You can't escape it. It's kind of part of that growing up thing. I mean, all of us long for that time, those good old days in childhood when the biggest problem we had was what were we going to play that day? But as we get older, demands start creeping in. Life gets more complex. Obstacles raise their ugly heads. Navigating life gets more challenging. And the stakes and the ramifications of our choices, our actions, well, they substantially increase. And so often, these things are not a part of our plan. Life can take a turn, and so often when we least expect it. Unwanted turns, like car gets in an accident, furnace stops working, bag suitcase gets stolen at the airport. Or more serious things, relationships hit a snag, lose a job, experience an illness. But at the same time, not all turns in life are unwelcome. Some we actually ask for, some we actually want. Getting a promotion, landing a better job, buying a new house, getting married, having kids, going away to college. But unwelcome or asked for, these turns in life still mean some kind of change. And that's where the rub comes in. Life is not going to be exactly the same going forward. Something's going to be different. Some things might even have to go away completely. And most all of us struggle with these changes. Our comfort zones get disrupted. We've come to the things we've come to expect and often look forward to are either gone completely or at the very least are not going to be the same. And there is resistance, even when the reason for the change is something we wanted. Bottom line, regardless of its origins, change is hard. And there's always some kind of adjustment that's required. Learning how to navigate in the new situation, time to get used to the new normal. Maybe there's even some bittersweet feelings about what is no longer there. And that's for change associated with something that we want. But when it comes to something that we didn't want in the first place, then just multiply all those things I just said by, a whole lot. Again, either way, change is hard. And that's when those uncomfortable feelings start creeping in. Maybe some worry, maybe some anxiety, maybe some remorse. But also maybe some fear. What will things be like now? What if I regret that decision? What if I am not up to the new task, job, expectations? When life takes a turn, it's got all the makings for hard times. In our exploration, we've been focusing on the scriptures of 1st and 2nd Kings, and in particular, in the insights that we can glean from a couple of the prophets in 1st and 2nd Kings. We started with a look at prophet Elijah, a pretty big name among prophets for sure. But along the way, God lets Elijah know that he's going to be succeeded by a person by the name of Elisha. And God commands Elijah to anoint Elisha to bring him along. And Elisha follows Elijah and serves him from that point on. Now, we don't hear much about or from Elisha until the time comes for Elijah to be taken up into heaven. We find that narrative beginning in 2 Kings chapter 2. Please follow along as I read aloud. Now the Lord was going to take Elijah up to heaven in a windstorm, and Elijah and Elisha were leaving Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, because the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you live, I won't leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The group of prophets from Bethel came out to Elisha. These prophets said to Elisha, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master away from you today?" Elisha said, "Yes, I know. Don't talk about it." Elijah said, "Elisha, stay here, because the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you live, I won't leave you." So they went to Jericho. The group of prophets from Jericho approached Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master away from you today?" He said, "Yes, I know. Don't talk about it." Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, because the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you live, I won't leave you." So both of them went on together. 50 members from the group of prophets also went along, but they stood at a distance. Both Elijah and Elisha stood beside the Jordan River. Elijah then took his coat, rolled it up, and hit the water. Then the water was divided in two. Both of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "What do you want me to do for you before I am taken away from you?" So Elijah says, "Let me have twice your spirit." Now it's worth taking a moment for a little explanation. Elijah was like at the top of the org chart in relation to the rest of the prophets. And Elisha, who has been following and learning and serving Elijah, is about to get promoted. And when Elijah makes the offer to Elisha, essentially asking, "What's the one thing I can do for you before I leave?" Elisha says, "Let me have twice your spirit." Or as the New Revised Standard Version captures it, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." It was by no means a power grab on the part of Elisha. Rather, Elisha was referring to the traditional practice of bestowing a double portion of the inheritance upon the oldest son. So Elisha was really asking for a double share of Elijah's spiritual authority, his divine power, his calling from God, that he might be recognized as the prophet equivalent of Elijah's firstborn. He wanted Elijah's blessing in order to continue the work of Elijah. Because Elisha, as Elijah's successor, had some pretty big shoes to fill. Talk about life taking a turn. Was Elisha a little nervous about the change that was about to take place? Would he be viewed by the other prophets as their leader? Would he have the chops to fulfill God's call, God's expectation? Let's continue reading. So Elijah says, "Let me have twice your spirit." Elijah said, "You've made a difficult request. If you can see me when I'm taken from you, then it will be yours. If you don't see me, it won't happen." Pardon me. They were walking along, talking, when suddenly a fiery chariot and fiery horses appeared and separated the two of them. Then Elijah went to heaven in a windstorm. Elisha was watching, and he cried out, "Oh, my father, Israel's chariots and its riders." When he could no longer see him, Elisha took hold of his clothes and ripped them in two. I can just imagine the sense of uncertainty that Elisha may have been feeling at that moment. I mean, for sure, a change had taken place. His teacher, his mentor, the person Elisha probably thought of as a father, gone. And then on top of that, the overwhelming thought of having to step into the shoes of that person. It was at that moment that Elisha had to let go of what was. Elisha knew that things could not go completely back to the way they were before. Elisha was feeling that resistance. Everything felt like it was being turned upside down. But hear what happens next. Then Elisha picked up the coat that had fallen from Elijah. He went back and stood beside the banks of the Jordan River. He took the coat that had fallen from Elijah and hit the water. He said, "Where is the Lord, Elijah's God?" And when he hit the water, it divided into two. Then Elijah crossed over. The group of prophets from Jericho saw him from a distance. They said, "Elijah's spirit has settled on Elisha." So they came out to meet him, bowing down before him. The change that was initially quite unsettling now showed its true colors as transformation. In other words, while this change was difficult, it was also transformative. The initial dust had settled, and in the midst of Elisha's longing, it was clear that Elisha was not in control. But by finding Elijah's cloak, Elisha also found the power and connection to God that he was looking for. He realized that God was at his side. And then, 3 days later, the citizens said to Elisha, "As you can see, sir, this city is in a good location, but the water is bad, and the land causes miscarriages." Elisha said, "Bring me a new bowl and put some salt in it." They did so. Elisha then went out and threw salt into the spring. He said, "This is what the Lord has said. I have purified this water. It will no longer cause death and miscarriage." The water has stayed pure right up to this very day, in agreement with the word that Elisha spoke. It was a time of new beginnings, new possibilities. God chose Elisha to carry the mantle, the same mantle that was previously carried by Elijah. And Elisha could have walked away, thrown in the towel, but he didn't. Elisha chose to follow God's lead and step onto the journey to move forward. A couple of weeks ago, we mentioned that this time in history of Elijah and Elisha was in like the 800s BCE. Crazy thing is that foundationally, so much still applies in our time today. Life taking a turn happens just as much today as it did 2,500 years ago. Because truth is, nothing ever really stays the same. Life is full of change. Sometimes that change involves things we wouldn't ask for in a million years. Sometimes we actually want the change. But either way, with change comes having something from the past that we have to let go of. And with that letting go comes some amount of disorientation, maybe even pain. And almost always we have to live in that change, at least for a while, to give time for the dust to settle a bit. The time when we are in between what was and what will be. And admittedly, it can also be a challenging, if not just plain difficult time. It can be a time of confusion and definitely a time of longing. But it is also a time when God is at work within us and around us, leading us through the transition. And that is where trust and faith in God's steadfast grace really comes in. Because with change, either asked for or thrust upon us, there comes a choice: to look backward or to look forward. Do we step onto the journey or turn back? Because God is always in the process of making things new, creating new beginnings, making new possibilities, and all out of love, and intended for God's beloved to grasp hold and embrace. And my friends, here's the thing. When life does take a turn, when we find ourselves thrust into such change, so often it can feel like we can't make it through. But we can. You can. Because the biggest and most important part to remember and know is that God is going to be with you in every step that lies ahead. Hard times are hard. But God has made it such that we never have to face those hard times alone or without God's power and grace. That's why we can know, you can know, that whatever you may be going through, do not give up. Don't lose faith, because God is with you even in the hard times. May it be so. It is so. Amen.